Hi, this is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. Well, the cholesterol myth is collapsing at a rate I never expected to see, and it's collapsing faster than I ever expected. And the latest nail in the coffin for cholesterol as a cause of your heart disease was just released on April 7th. Dr. Budoff from UCLA was the lead author on it. Nick Norowitz, who you may see on YouTube, and Dave Feldman were also participants in this particular study. They looked at over 100 individuals who were eating a high saturated fat, low carb diet, and they were all in ketosis. They were all checked to make sure they were remaining in ketosis, and they've been doing a ketogenic diet for over 5 years. Now, this particular group of people were called lean mass hyperresponders. These are people that, not everybody that goes on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet has an automatic elevation in their LDL cholesterol levels, but some can be pretty dramatic. And, Dave Feldman was one of them. Nick Norowitz's cholesterol can go as high as over 500. But the question is, does this create a bad effect on the heart? And what they were looking at with this particular group of people, and these are mostly people that are in their 50s that have been eating this diet for a long time, and they've got extremely high dietary cholesterol, and it's not hereditary. There's a hereditary condition that can cause a very high level of LDL cholesterol. These people were not in that group. I mean, it strictly comes along basically because of their diet. So what they did was, they tested them out and said, okay, we're going to take some baseline looks at your heart, and we're going to see what it looks like a year later. And what they found is all of the people hearts were absolutely the same, if not better, after a year of eating a very strict carnivore, high saturated fat diet, and they still had the elevated cholesterol levels, yet there's no damage to the heart. And these are people that are in the prime candidates for heart disease. They're right at that age when it really should start showing up, yet it isn't happening. And the reason why is, frankly, because dietary cholesterol, or your cholesterol level, I don't think is related to your overall risk of heart disease. It's inflammation. I mean, there's two schools of thought for what caused heart disease. There was a lipid heart hypothesis popularized by Ancel Keys and Dr. Youngkin, who's over at Oxford, who was saying, no, it's the sugar that's causing the inflammation. That's what's causing, the increased amount of sugar in the system is causing inflammation, and the inflammation is causing damage, and the cholesterol is actually repairing it. So, you had the two schools of thought. The federal government went with the lipid heart hypothesis. Never been proven. There's never been a mechanism of action. They have spent billions of dollars trying to prove and show how having elevated cholesterol creates heart disease, but they've yet to be able to show how it happens. UCLA did a study a few years ago where they looked at people that were in the hospital with heart attacks, and they checked their cholesterol levels. And what was fascinating to me was, it was a scattershot. Some people had high cholesterol, other people had very low cholesterol. There was no correlation between the cholesterol level and the fact that they were having a heart attack. And we've spent $1 trillion since the 1990s on statin drugs trying to lower cholesterol. About 20% or so of Americans are on some sort of statin medication. Yet there has not been a precipitous drop of like 20% in the amount of heart disease that's going on. People are still having heart attacks at the same rate, if not higher, than we did earlier. Why is that not happening when you've got these statin drugs? We've reduced the amount of smoking in this country rather dramatically. I mean, we went from nearly half of all adults to about 10% of adults smoking. Yet, there's been no drop in the number of heart attacks. We've been dropping $1 trillion worth of statins. Quarter of the population has been taking them, yet we're not seeing any major reduction in the amount of heart attacks. And, I come to the conclusion when I look at it, it's like, it ain't the cholesterol that's causing the heart attacks. Something else is causing the inflammation. And, while this latest study does not prove, that inflammation and low carb is protective against heart attacks, it is certainly one more nail in the coffin of the idea that a high LDL cholesterol and taking a statin drug is going to somehow protect you from heart disease. Because frankly, this one shows pretty conclusively that there's no danger to LDL cholesterol. And, the war on saturated fat's been going on for a long time too, yet, really for almost a decade. The American Academy of Cardiology has come out and said, hey, look, dietary saturated fat is no longer a nutrient of concern. It may be protective against strokes even, which is almost a stunning endorsement of saturated fat in the diet. About the only two organizations that are out there pushing hard for trying to reduce the amount of saturated fat in the diet is one, the American Heart Association, for some reason keeps pushing it. I mean, they're heavily funded by Procter & Gamble and Big Food, who manufacture these industrial seed oils. I don't think there's a conflict of interest, but, one never knows. And the American Dietary Guideline. The American government pushes a low saturated fat diet. Though, when you look at the people that make up that board and the people making that recommendation, many of whom work for Big Food. Not that there's any conflict of interest or anything like that, but, one never knows. I wish somebody would ask that question at some point, but, nobody has yet. But the American Academy of Cardiology has said, saturated fat isn't an issue anymore. Cholesterol probably isn't as big an issue as we've been talking about. But unfortunately, medicine and science advance, usually one funeral at a time. This stuff has been beaten into my head. I mean, ever since I was a kid in high school, back, in health class, I was told cholesterol was a big enemy and saturated fat was a big enemy. And frankly, I remember when I changed my diet, when I switched over from eating a standard American diet to going to a high fat, low carb diet, going keto about 8 years ago. I kind of looked at all that stuff going, oh my God, this stuff is either going to make me very healthy or it's going to kill me, and I'm not sure which, frankly. I wasn't completely convinced because I was still terrified after years of indoctrination on cholesterol and why it was so darn dangerous. But more and more we look at it, we've gotten more and more evidence every single day that cholesterol probably isn't the big killer that we think it is. And this is just one more nail in the coffin. This is Kirk, Bariatric Carnivore. I hope you like this message. Hit subscribe. Join this channel of other like-minded people. I try to put out a couple messages each week unless I'm really sick like I was last week. So I will talk to you again soon.